Thank you. So we'll just, I apologize in advance for any stumbling. I'll try to live up to Lauren's shoes for how she ran these meetings. Feel free to jump in if I do anything that seems off our standard procedures. So we'll just go around and do introductions. Then we'll follow the agenda that Dean sent out last week.
Hi, this is Jake. I can't hear anybody speaking. I could hear Dean well earlier. I don't think I changed anything on my end.
Can you still hear me, Jake?
Can't hear.
Anyone else having speaker problems? All right.
We hear you fine, Jake.
Earbuds. It's my took them off. Okay, sorry about that.
All right, you can hear us now?
Yeah. Yep.
Excellent.
How embarrassing.
That's an easy solution. Take it. All right. So I'll just call on people, do your introductions. I'm Lindsay. I'm the chair with the MRBA, and I'm a voting member. Jake, why don't you go ahead next?
Jake Kucher, alternate for municipalities, I believe. Did I say that right?
Yes. Sarah.
Sarah Downs from Enosburg, a municipality voting member.
Great. Dave.
I'm David Allerton, Public Works Director in the town of St. Albans, and I'm an alternate on the committee here.
Maddie.
Hi, I'm Maddie Ando. I work for Northwest Regional Planning Commission, so I'm helping as a QUISP staff member.
Thank you. Kent.
Good morning from California. My name is Kent Henderson. I'm the voting member and chair of the Friends of Northern Lake Champlain.
Great. Lauren.
Lauren Weston, District Manager of the Franklin County NRCD, voting member.
Barry.
Morning, everyone. Barry Lamke, Northwest Regional Planning Commission, voting member.
All right. I'm not sure, July or Triana? Welcome.
Julie, Stormwater Coordinator at San Albans Town.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. Adele, or Dan, I guess. Dan, are you there? Okay. Come back and see if Dan is on as Adele. And then Jim wrote that there's an AI assistant helping take notes for the meeting. So
yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure what that is, but Jim Pays, I'm just a retired Vermont DEC employee, but interested in what's going on.
Awesome. Great. So that's everyone on screen. Oh, sorry, Alaire, you popped in. Oh, Alaire, are you? Do you want to do an intro?
Oh, yeah,
sorry.
hi. Yep. Hi, I'm Alaire Diamond with Vermont Land Trust.
Awesome.
And I'm a voting member.
Great. And then Dan, are you able to hear us? Dan Seeley? Maybe I'll write in the chat and see if Dan sees that. So if Dan is able to participate, it looks like we have 6 voting members. Correct me if I'm wrong.
We have, well, if we include Dan, we have 7. Lauren, okay. Barry, Lindsay, Kent, Blair, Dan, and Sarah.
I didn't count myself. Excellent. Glad our numbers align. Awesome. So sorry, I've navigated away from the agenda, but meeting protocols, our standard meeting protocols. I don't know if you have the slide to share, Dean, but please keep your screen open if at all possible. Be respectful. What are our standard Zoom norms? Yeah. Thanks for all saying you're voting or alternate. That helps us keep track of whether or not we have a quorum. Yeah, thanks for joining us today. We're a pretty mellow group, so if you can't be heard, just write in the chat. I'll try to make sure I read that out. And that's great. On to the next. Any conflict of interest declarations? Dean had to put down that he didn't anticipate any, but I'll just make sure that it's part of our usual protocols. Hearing none, we'll move on to review or any adjustments to the agenda, or if none, I'll seek a motion to approve.
Actually, Lindsay, if it's okay, I received an email from Karen Bates, and she has asked that her presentation be after 11:30. So it's possible that we may have to do some adjustments. I just wanted to mention that.
Great.
And then just a clerical question. Am I understanding correctly that the Jim and Otter, it's also connected to you, Jim Pease? Okay, there's not another Jim who I'm missing out on. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, sorry, Dean. That came with the Lamoille NRCD, which I'm on. I'm a member of, and I guess I agreed to it. I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah.
I think what it is it basically, records and makes the minutes. I don't know, I can send you a copy if you want, but
Sure, go ahead. I think Kent Henderson has also had some experience with that. I just want to make sure that there wasn't another Jim that I was missing for the minutes. Dea has moved on. She's started law school, and our next Eco AmeriCorps service member has not started yet. So I'm going to have more responsibility for the minutes than I do sometimes. I just want to make sure that was clear.
Great.
And apologies for getting the day wrong.
I'm just writing to Dan to see if he can see the chat. Before I forget to do that. All right. So with the sort of fluidity of potentially moving Karen Bates' presentation from item number 8 down, just if she hasn't joined us by the time we get to that, are there any other adjustments to the agenda? And if not, I'll take a motion, or I seek a motion to approve.
I move to approve. This is Lauren.
Thanks, Lauren. Is there a second?
This is Kent. I second Lauren's motion.
Great, thank you. So we have a motion from Lauren, a second from Kent. Are there any abstentions? Hearing none. All in favor? Raise your hand or express yourself. Otherwise, I'm trying to get it so I can see the whole screen. Seeing Sarah, Kent, Lauren, Barry, Alaire, myself, that's Lindsay. So that's who I see voting. Any opposed? Seeing none, we will approve that motion. Next, approving or checking out the minutes. Any discussion of the minutes as they were sent out by Dean as part of the meeting packet. I'll invite any conversation about that, and then if there's no conversation, I'll seek a motion to approve. Hearing no discussion, does someone want a motion? Looks like Sarah, are you motioning to approve?
I move to approve minutes.
Great. That's Sarah Downs. Is there a second?
Lauren, seconding.
Thank you, Lauren. Okay, any abstentions?
I abstain. I was not at the meeting.
Thanks, Barry. So Barry abstains. All in favor of approving those minutes from the last meeting? I see Kent, Lauren, Alaire, Sarah, myself. With Barry's abstention, that is our voting membership. Any naysayers? Seeing none, the minutes are approved. Okay, next up, public comment of items not related to the agenda. Anyone have anything they want to bring up?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Dave.
Okay, so here in the town of St. Albans, we are juggling all kinds of projects, big stormwater projects, smaller ones, our road projects, or ditching, everything like that. And it's kind of hard for me to keep track of all the money and the funding available. And I know that, this group is constantly looking for projects to work on, right? So I was just wondering if we could discuss a little bit about what kinds of projects are eligible. I know they're the non-permitted kind of projects, but what are some other types of projects that we would be able to fund through this program? I mean, I've got, the towns can only work in the right of way, right? So we can do everything we can to keep our catch basins clean, our ditches clear. We can do all that work in the right of way, but as soon as it gets out of the right of way, the stormwater drainages are plugged. There might be a culvert on a private property that's plugged and we can't get to those. Are those eligible projects for this kind of money? I'm just kind of curious if there was a list of what types of projects we might be able to fund through this program. So if anybody could provide me some simple and quick clarification, I would appreciate that.
You should also start your video.
Thank you.
Oh, that's helpful.
It's just like regular Zoom.
Okay.
All right. Like Dan is joining us.
Yeah.
We had technical difficulties. Hi, Dan.
Adele fixed it for me. I don't know how to run this thing.
Thanks, Adele.
You're welcome.
All right.
Just in
Yeah,
quick.
but we're going to be driving, so you may get road noise.
That's okay.
I'll mute you from this end. Or actually, Dean, I'm not sure. Maybe you'll have to do that.
No, don't bother. It's fine.
All right.
Dave, a quick response, and for the benefit of people that are hearing your question, there is a list of eligible project types. I will send that to you. It's in a spreadsheet that DEC maintains. You're right. The QUISP can't provide funding, and the BWIC can't provide funding for projects that a community must do because of a regulation. Projects that are on private property are eligible. You and I have traded a little bit of email. Some projects on private roads, they would also be eligible, but it starts to get a little bit tricky, and DEC is still evolving the policies. So the short answer is yes, technically eligible, but they may not have very strong phosphorus benefits, and we're under constant pressure to spend the money on projects that have a good cost effectiveness. And so it's really the name of the game is the numbers and finding a way to create a project that has relatively good phosphorus benefits. And that that may mean different things to different people, but that's the context.
Okay. Yeah, if you could send me that list, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Is there any other public comment? Okay. It looks like next up is seating of any new reps or alternates if required. We had this last meeting, but I think we're pretty well set right now.
Yeah, I include this as a standard item just in case there's something that crops up after I send out the meeting notice, and I'm not aware of any at this time.
Right, great. So we are going to jump around our agenda slightly to solicitation schedule. Dean, you want to take the lead on this?
Yes, and apologies for the poor formatting of the slides here. This is information that you received in your packets. Hopefully it's a little larger and more legible, but the bottom line
Dean, you're
is,
not actually
You share your
sharing.
screen.
Thanks.
thank you very much. So this is a continuation essentially of a discussion we started last time. We're going to be doing 3 project solicitations each year. We've established that. Originally it was going to be 4, but now it's 3. There's a question about what's the best schedule for having that. The group did a prioritization in July, and so it's now getting about time for us to announce the availability of another round of funding. And so I'm pretty sure that people will agree that I should do another announcement sometime in the next week or so, with the idea that the council would do a prioritization at its meeting in November. What I was hearing previously, though, was summer might be a bad time. And so in the meeting packet, I gave you a series of options. And I know that this is maybe a little bit subjective and it should be more structured, but I wanted to get some feedback on these options for the coming rounds of projects solicitations. And one of the reasons for doing this now is that it would be administratively a lot simpler if we have the schedule really clear and we can put it on the website and advertise it, and everyone would know that, oh, if I'm not going to try for this one, I'm going to try for this next one, and that next one is definitely going to be on thus and such a date. So the options are one where we are doing a solicitation next week and the council does a prioritization in November, then it does another one in March, and then it does another one in July. And this is kind of the normal business, but we found that, oh, July, maybe that's not the best time to do a prioritization. So maybe this isn't people's favorite. Another option would be we do November, February, and instead of July, we squeeze things together a little bit more and we do June. That, compresses the schedule a little bit more. People might feel like we need, if I was to say that we're going to announce another round next week, people might say, oh gosh, we're doing another one already, maybe we should wait. So I just wanted to throw out an option where we're sliding things back a little bit. So would people prefer something like December, April, or August? And then another option is even more compressed, November, January, and March, so that we're doing these things in rapid succession, basically 3 meetings in a row. It's really compressing things, but it's avoiding the summer, which people have said is maybe not the best time. So that's the question for the group. I don't know if it'll be easy to do to reach a consensus, but that's the question for the group. Is there a consensus schedule for the next 3 rounds? Check the chat. Okay, and I'm already seeing some comments on people liking 2.
Yeah. So in the chat, Lauren put, I really liked option 2 personally. I also do. Alaire says, I also like option 2. Lauren, go ahead and speak.
Yeah, I just think option 2 is nice because you have, let's say you have a construction project you know is going to go forward. You can apply in November and get that rolling. And then let's say there's one that you don't yet have all your ducks in a row. And then you can get a notification in February, which is still in time to do construction season. And then early June, I feel like is still pretty reasonable. Not necessarily for the construction, but maybe for project development that comes up. Was kind of my thinking there.
Yeah, I think the more compressed schedule, while attractive because it avoids the busy season, means that we'll miss out on opportunities that crop up other parts of the year. So that was a concern that I had about the more compressed schedules. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with basically everything Lauren said for those reasons. The one thing I was thinking about was option 2 with possibly like the December instead of November, but then what I'm hearing you say, Lauren, is that the November would be helpful because then you could like line up a contractor even before the end of the year. Have a little more time there. That's not a time frame that I've like, or a schedule that I've worked in myself. So I think about it more like avoiding having to apply in October when you're still busy with like work for that year. But so either way, it makes, does that make sense? More sense to you to have like the November deadline than the December? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think option 2 is great.
I feel like Brooke is punting.
All right. Are there any other thoughts about option 2 specifically, or does anyone want to advocate for one of the other options? Okay, I'm not seeing anything. Dean, do you want us to take a vote on this?
I am fine. Certainly you can take a vote, but I'm fine moving ahead if it's the minutes are going to show there was a consensus for option 2. I'm happy that it's been this easy.
Great. This is your last opportunity, folks, to advocate for a different option or to say option 2, no way. Seeing none, we'll move forward. Thanks, Dean.
Thanks.
Should I move?
I don't think we need a vote on this.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the minutes will reflect that.
Okay.
People were given the opportunity to advocate for a different one, and it's not something that requires our vote. Yeah, Jean, do you want to keep going ahead with contracting requirements while we wait for Karen to join us?
Yes. Thank you for in advance for putting up with what's going to be an unavoidably dry topic. It's something that I had said to some of the folks who received funding for projects that we would have discussions, but it seemed like a good thing to get the conversation going with everybody or making everyone aware, and then we can have follow-up conversations. One of the reasons why I feel it's important to cover this is because as we got to the end of the first year of the QUISP and WIC process with DEC, and we were doing annual reporting and things of that sort, the weight of the administrative requirements just has become clearer and clearer. And the administrative requirements include those that are going to be coming from DEC to the QUISP to the folks who have projects. And one of the things that if I'm a little more cynical, I feel like because we're having to achieve such big phosphorus reduction targets, and the progress is going to seem slow, we're not going to have a lot of, there isn't going to be a lot of action required to watch the phosphorus numbers grow. And so what else are we going to be watching? Well, or what else is DEC going to be watching? Well, they're going to be looking at the administrative requirements that go along with the phosphorus growth. And so it's really important to talk about these things so that we don't do work and then find out that we were supposed to do something and we get slapped on the hand for it. So this is a slightly less lengthy list than the one that was included in the meeting packet. And I do beg your forgiveness for running through this, but I just am going to touch on these things, try to stress their importance, and then I'll answer any questions that people have to clarify them. Some of this stuff is just really obvious and really basic, but it's also easy to forget about them. And so one of the things that I was reminded of is checklists and the importance of checklists, and how we want to be promoting the use of checklists with everybody who we are involved with so that we don't forget anything. But this is in the form, or in a sense, a form of a checklist. But the kinds of things we are talking about with procurement, and procurement is the stuff that the QUISP must oversee once the Basin Council has said a project is good and deserves funding. The QUISP is responsible for making sure that the procurement happens the way that it's supposed to, and we pass that on to the parties. So we have to make sure that everybody who gets the funding and who uses that funding for the project is aware of the importance of avoiding conflict of interest. So if your organization doesn't have a set of policies regarding procurement, it's probably time that you get them, and that those policies say things about avoiding conflict of interest. So there's, a situation where you want to make sure that doesn't happen is where there's a personal gain. Someone on your staff is also a contractor, and we have to navigate that. And don't have your staff accepting gratuities from people who are going to be coming to you to bid on projects. There are some things that are in our contract with DEC that it's just worth mentioning. I think that in the real world, it's not going to be coming up too often, but sometimes there can be intergovernmental agreements or like joint purchasing. So maybe it's less of an intergovernmental agreement than, let's say, two partner organizations decide to get together and contract for something. Generally speaking, that's a good idea. Things that are going to save money are a good idea. So if you have a situation where you're doing a project and you could bootstrap using an agreement that you have with other partner organizations, that should be a cost, should result in a cost savings. And so that's okay. That's actually preferred. Record keeping. There's going to be the need to document how you procure and how you reach decisions about who your selected contractor is and your reasons for doing it. And in many cases, it's going to come down to costs. If you use a pre-qualified list, all you have to do is ask for cost proposals, and it can come down to the cost. But that might not be all that you want it to come down to. The experience that the firm has with the specific type of project or with the setting or the area can also be considered, but it needs to be documented. It needs to be something that is clearly in your proposal or your request for proposals, and is clearly known to everybody who's going to respond that, hey, if I'm responding, I'm going to be competing against people, and they may have an advantage because they know the area better than I do. Contracts, we want to avoid the kinds of contracts where it's going to potentially result in higher than expected costs. So we would not want to see someone have a time and material contract. We want a fixed price contract that is going to control the cost. We want there to be procedures for resolving disputes. If people bid on a job, there should be some opportunity for them to say, well, I think you didn't treat my proposal fairly. So these are things that are in the regional planning commission's procurement policies. We try to live by them. It again seems like common sense, but when we do contracts, we try to remember to include the paragraphs that say that there, or account in our schedule for the need to have time to resolve disputes. So as an example, there could be a period of a week that someone could lodge a complaint about a selection. And then after that period is gone, then you don't have to worry about it anymore, but at least you've created that window. Again, this is pretty basic, boring, dry stuff, but we want to encourage competition, openness. We don't want things to be ambiguous. And we want people, when they do receive proposals, to analyze the costs You know, if someone gave you a bid and it's just one number and you don't understand what made up that number, it makes that number really hard to compare with the other numbers. It is important to know what the total costs are, but if you get 3 proposals and 2 of the 3 break things down and they spread the cost in a logical manner, but you get a third that doesn't, it does raise the question of, well, are they thinking the same way, or are they going to be doing something that's different from the other? So analyzing the cost is important. But you know, the main message, I guess, is this maximizing your advantage. So choose someone who's capable of maximizing the job for you. I'm going to take a breather there because we're roughly halfway through the list, and no one has raised their hand and no one has fallen asleep yet. But
Dean, there is a, Lauren put in the chat, would NRPC be able to share that specific language that you used around dispute resolution?
yes, yeah, I'll put together a package. If I haven't shared the procurement language already, I will.
That'd be great. It'd be great to have a refresher too. Just you know, we have a procurement policy, but it's fairly simple. So I'm sure it could be beefed up and would behoove us to adopt some of the language that that you specifically as the QUISP are going to need.
I will do that.
Thank you.
And so there are sort of I don't want to say that these are conflicting themes, but there are multiple themes that are in play with this process, and prioritizing minority-owned or operated small businesses is a theme that is in the contracts that we have with DEC and that we ourselves have. We are trying to encourage what used to be called WBEEs or DBE type enterprises, disadvantaged businesses. So creating opportunities for those types of businesses is something that we have some responsibility to do. So I just want to flag that. If people have never encountered those kinds of things, then it's a conversation that we should probably have so that you can be aware of them. And if the day ever came where somebody came to you and say, well, you know, we're checking on, you know, 30 contracts around the state, we want to know how you did this, you will have something meaningful to say. Contract should have basic things like termination clauses and how much notice before one side or the other side pulls out of the contract. You shouldn't ever, yeah, this is kind of highfalutin, but the basic idea is that you do an evaluation of the costs that are in a proposal and you put aside the profit. Whatever the profit is going to be for the contractor, you put that aside and you have a separate conversation about profit. Does that make sense? It seems simple, but it may be not as simple on the surface. It's just something that the contracts that we have that we pass down, and you probably had contracts with DEC where they say this. And it's just good to be aware of it so that as you receive a proposal, you can say, yes, when we received this proposal, we were thinking about the costs that are separate from the profit the contractor proposes. And so here's a better way of saying it. You get 2 proposals and they're very, very similar. One's slightly less, and then someone's proposing a 10% profit and someone is proposing a 15% profit. And you really like, I mean, if you put aside profit, the 15% firm has some preference. If you look at profit after, you could go to that firm and say, we like your proposal, but your profit is half again more than the next best, and we would like to negotiate with you, and we think the profit should be 10% rather than 15%. So hopefully that helps convey that you're not just swallowing the overall, you're not just saying, oh, we like this proposal better and we're going to pay the 15%. it's looking at the profit separately. And I see Alaire has raised her hand.
I mean.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you can talk through kind of, what do you mean by profit? Like, who's profiting? I mean, these are working with contractors who are saying this is what this costs. How do we know, like, it's not like it's not information that we necessarily even have. Like, we're just comparing costs to do the same kind of work.
Yeah.
If they got a survey of the.
And I am gonna
farmers,
mute, I think it's Adele.
Yeah.
If that's okay. Alaire, it may not be something that is seen frequently in the kinds of agreements that you're striking, but it's not uncommon in public works type projects where you have an engineering firm and they will do a budget, and they'll have, you know, 2 or 3 different categories of personnel, and they have what their rate is. And so those are showing what the actual costs of that firm for that time are, what those costs are. So if that's all that the contract paid, then the firm never has profit. So and businesses are in business to earn a profit. So in their cost proposal, after they've shown what all of the real costs are, the costs that are unavoidable, there's another line that would say what the profit is, so that on top of all of these other costs, there's a percentage. And that's the profit. That's what the firm is saying, that, you know, if you do all the accounting and auditing and whatever, you know what the real costs are. The profit is why they're in business. So it's possible that when you are receiving proposals for jobs, they're saying this is all inclusive. It includes profit. But what I'm drawing attention to is the fact that being able to understanding what the profit is it 10%? Is it 5%? Is it 15%? Is important. And being able to say that you've addressed it independent of the other costs is something to do. I don't know. Does that help? I don't.
I mean, not really. It's like, you know, as a business, it's like I would say, this is my hourly rate. If I were like a solo contractor, this is my hourly rate, which includes like all of the things that I need to do, including like make money to
Anything else?
live my life and be able to offer that as a service, which is like different from, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's like a personal profit sort of. I've just never seen a contract, and I'm curious with other people in the group. Have you ever seen a contract where someone has like, these are our costs and then this is our profit? No, I mean, people are like, I would cost $100 an hour. It's not that they're getting paid $100 an hour every hour on the day. It's like, that's what they need to do for the hours that they're actually being billed to be able to cover all their costs and have it be a successful business. So I've never seen like I mean, you could do that analysis of like, what is your percent profit, I guess. But
Yeah, I mean.
I've just never seen that shown to on a bid or
It's not like they got, it's not
on a
like they got
proposal.
an easement saying.
So I don't know how we would determine that, and maybe that's,
Not like they
yeah, anyone else have any insight on this? Like, having seen
got
it?
anything.
Jim has his hand up. I don't know.
Well, I just was wondering, I mean, like Alaire was saying, if you're comparing 2 bids, and I can't imagine that the bids are identical except for the sort of maybe the labor costs. You know, everybody's estimate for the materials is going to be slightly different. So I was just wondering, is this a required element? Are you saying in the procurement process from DEC that you have to? I guess I understand what they're asking if it is, but I guess I don't understand how you would do it other than sort of generally look at the numbers and determine the higher costs were incorrect or exorbitant. Maybe the engineer was charging 150 an hour versus 100. I'm just wondering, Dean, is there protocol to this or a procedure to how to do this?
There, I don't have a standalone protocol. I can pull out the language in our procurement policies that talks about doing this. And I can try to connect the dots between our procurement policies and the things in the DEC contract that would require this or how it would require it. But I don't have something that I can show right now
Right.
that says this. The
But
thing I would say is that how it's going to be in practice is like Alaire just said, that a lot of times it's going to be three contractors that are going to say, here are our hourly rates, and they cover everything. And you're going to be able to compare. It's like, hey, this is everything all told.
okay.
And I don't think that this means that you're going to have to say, what is your what is your profit in there, if that's how they're reporting their costs. But if someone is doing a proposal and they're showing what their real costs are, and then on top of that, they're putting their profit, then you have to look at, you're meant to look at that profit margin separately after you've compared the true cost, the actual cost. But I appreciate that in many cases, it's going to be someone's hourly rate, and their answer is going to be, that's everything. That includes my profit, because there are big businesses that will specify their profit separately.
Right. So so the possibility of somebody listing their profit, it seems pretty low, unless I've been out of touch for a while, but I don't recall that you would have to go through and compare, but you don't have a 10% extra profit, do you, at the bottom?
And some of this is biased perhaps by the NRPC's own procurement policies, which have been transportation heavy, where in the engineering realm, yes, they are showing their profits separately. They're saying that as part of the proposal. This is a flag for me to provide more details on the language that's in our procurement policies and what exactly. I don't believe that it's a requirement that every proposal break out profit. That's not what I'm saying. It's that if there is profit specified, that you consider it separate from the rest and negotiate it separately.
Okay.
So I can just add in there that sometimes you do see that in the consulting world, where you get a cost plus a fixed fee contract. So they've got their hourly cost. There's usually some kind of a multiplication factor that they use. It's usually around 3, that then allows them to pay that employee their hourly rate, plus their fringe benefits, plus the overhead costs, and then they have their fixed fee on top of that. And sometimes it typically is a percentage of 10 to 12%. But when you're talking about contractors, I don't believe I've seen those in a contract before. Like if you're getting somebody to actually go out and do the work, like could be a unit price job, you don't typically see the profit margins for the contractors that way. You do in the engineers and the other consultant types, but not necessarily with the contractors.
Thanks, Dave. And just bear in mind that this type of these procurement requirements are applying to everything. And so it would include to the design, as the project is in preliminary and final design. And this is going to be where it's more common, and it's going to include the implementation, where if you're dealing with a contractor and the proverbial person with the yellow machine, you're not likely to see that, but it's going to come up in the engineering and design phase. Okay, so this is something I will definitely flesh out. That's good. But and I see Karen's here, so maybe what we can do is we can break things up a little bit, but just finishing out the list, there are things to keep in mind, like don't have unreasonable demands in your proposal that might be somehow meant to, steer the selection in any way so that you want competition to be fair. You don't want there to be any kind of bias. You don't want people who might bid on the proposal to have any role in preparing the proposal. And I understand that that gets tricky. I've seen it because there are some times when it makes perfect sense for someone who might bid to be involved with helping you. And so you have to try to create as much distance between whatever input they might give and then the actual drafting and issuing as you possibly can. And you want the proposals, if you have a specific thing in mind, use a request for proposals or request for cost proposals. If things are less defined, that's when you might ask for requests for qualifications. This is just kind of generic advice to follow. I don't know that it's going to be something that will happen too many times. My guess is almost always it'll be a request for proposals, including a request for a cost proposal. We're under the microscope in terms of our publicizing requests for proposals. There is that minimum requirement of soliciting 3, and some jobs just may not be attractive, and so you might be lucky if you get interest, and so you have to try to get at least 3 legitimate proposals. You might not get 3 legitimate, but you've tried. But you want to advertise broadly. You want to be able to show that you've advertised broadly, unless you're, again, using pre-qualified firms, and then it's, go to at least 3 and solicit and make sure it's 3 who are, likely to do this kind of work, that you don't ask somebody to be completely out of their normal work area to get those bids. So broadly as you can, except when you're at that stage where using 3 pre-qualified firms, just say, here, this type of work, what it involves, give us your cost proposal, and we'll go from there. Do you want the requests to be clear? You want people to understand what it is that they're doing. I've done a lot of these things, and it's still surprising how many times you'll get a proposal where it's clear that they didn't understand or didn't follow the directions. The last point is just try to know in advance who's going to be evaluating the responses and what kind of criteria they're going to be using, and so that you set things up in advance, and then you executed your plan, and then you made your decisions. So many proposal or request for proposals will say this work will be judged based on cost and familiarity, and you'll have factors. Make sure you use those factors when you're evaluating the responses. Okay, so thought I would keep this at pretty high level. I think as a break, maybe it's a good time to go to Karen and let her do her presentation if there are no other questions.
Sounds good to me. Karen, you want to present on assessment tools?
Yes.
And you should be able to share, Karen, if you have slides that you wanted to show.
Yeah. So I'm sharing screen. I think that's the way to do it, right?
Yep.
All right. Right, so can you see the slides?
We're seeing your slide deck, so it's not
Yeah, we see everything.
Okay. Yeah, let's do view slideshow, right?
Yep.
From beginning. All right, there you got it. So Lindsay, you know this picture. This is just one of the most beautiful pictures.
So does Jake. Jake knows
I know
it.
that picture well as well.
Yeah, so if people don't know, this is actually one of the projects that was identified by MRBA, and you can probably tell me exactly how you identified it, whether it was an assessment or whether it was just an understanding of what was going on, because you've got the background, but we can do that at the end of the show. So basically, I had thought that it might help you all to come to the same level and understanding how the state develops assessments that will then provide the projects that will be available for the QUISPs to undertake, and then also help them then meet their target. Understanding what the assessments actually provide you and the types of projects that might be better for phosphorus reduction, it will also be part of it. So I'll go through each of the assessments, the descriptions of them, the goals, and then describe some of the assessments that are going on in Basin 6. I don't have the most updated ones, so we can add those in by your input. So the agency's approach and to address the phosphorus in Lake Champlain, to reduce the loading to the lake, it's an all-in approach, meaning that every source of phosphorus, every land use, as well as wastewater treatment, is an area where phosphorus can be reduced and should be reduced. And we're going to find those projects where they're a priority because they are, they're going to reduce pollution, they're going to be cost effective, and they actually can be implemented. We know, we're confident as we're identifying them, that's a project that's actually going to go in on the ground, and we can maintain it, or somebody else can maintain it successfully for the appropriate time period. In finding projects, you got to begin with this first step of assessment. Then you go to planning, then design, and then implementation. Assessment is looking at the landscape and trying to figure out, well, which projects are going to be the best for us, meet our goals. In the end, you want the assessment to prioritize projects. So, and those generally, for most assessments, they're going to find areas where the project is a priority project because it's the source of phosphorus loading or sediment loading is significant enough. The solution is going to be that solution that addresses the phosphorus to the greatest extent that it can. The right practice, right place. You know, if you're not going to put a rain garden on clay soils, doesn't work. You have a pond, not a rain garden. Landowner agreement. Again, this idea that it's got to be implementable. So you got to make sure that landowners, those where they agree or could agree with more understanding, are going to be prioritized. That you're also protecting natural resources. There can't be a removal of a landscape that helps moderate phosphorus load in exchange for a new practice that also does that. We want to keep both. And then that we know that there can be some sort of maintenance agreement, and it can be maintained because it's going to have to be on the landscape for a certain amount of time for us to understand, and it's going to happen. So we have, for the phosphorus loading reduction, we have two tools. We've got our two sides. We've got the regulations that we have in place for every sector, but we also then want the non-regulatory practices. For regulatory, that's pretty easy, right? You like for developed land, you have the towns that now have to manage their roads. You've got 3-acre permits that if you have 3 acres that of developed land that don't have stormwater management, now you've got to do it. But so what do we do for those areas that don't fall under those categories? Well, you got to change the stewardship ethic. So within the community, we want to find projects that people will look at and be able to say, once they're implemented, oh, well, I can do that. Or that's something I want to at least keep up if we've given it to someone, especially the lakeshore restoration. That's very much the goal is you implement projects so that you can change the understanding and the commitment and the acceptance of how we manage our land around a lake, because that's what the community does. So we've got it like all regulate. All sectors have both regulatory and non-regulatory sides, and we're focused on the non-regulatory. So forests, same thing, but we're focused on roads, non-regulatory focused on roads. For streams, you know, it's protection, both sides protection, but we do protections on a non-regulatory basis as well as plantings and stream projects. Ag is probably the one that's a little bit different in that we don't have the agency doesn't develop the assessments except for maybe natural resource projects. And the identification of non-RAP farm projects is something that I think the NRCDs could talk to us more about, and I will stay away from trying to explain that. So the assessments that we have are river corridor plans, lake watershed action plans, stormwater master plans, road erosion inventories. Those are agency developed assessments that we feel are going to meet our goals. And the approach that is behind those assessments is that for stormwater, we are reducing pollutants, but we're also reducing the volume. So you either sink it through infiltration, spread it, or send it. You want to get it away from water through those approaches. And, so for example, a ditch, it's great because you're sending it, but it's not really doing as much work as, let's say, to reduce the volume of the water as say, infiltration. Roads. There are a lot of roads, private as well as the municipal and the state roads as well. And so the approach is basically, we got to reduce the erosion on the roads. The roads cannot be eroding. And so the idea is you develop practices that move it off as soon as possible, and that it's cheap because you have a lot of roads. It's easy so that you can just get a contractor in there, and it's and it's fast. And so that's the approach for roads. Forests, for non-regulatory, this is non-regulatory. It's really, we're focusing on the forest roads for the most part, and maybe log landings. And it's usually focused on if you look up at the roads, the same sort of approach, just really make sure that the roads themselves are not eroding, that you're not funneling water in a way that's going to allow it to be erosive on the sides or on the roadbed itself. The rivers are interesting because it's moving it towards equilibrium. It's not avoiding all erosion. It's basically saying that if we have rivers that have a set position on the landscape that will allow it to flood onto the floodplain, it's not going to be limited by a crossing, then you're going to have a lot less erosion in the end. So that's our goal. And we've actually now are able to associate it with phosphorus reduction through our functioning floodplain initiative. But it's really about protecting it or reconnecting floodplains and increasing continuity. Lakes are full of everything, right? And so especially for those projects, because there's small lots as well, that you may be looking at planting a little bit of buffer at a time. But really the theory behind lake-wise, which is part of this, is that, again, you get a certain number, 22%, I think, of the land use to reflect the values that will protect surface waters. Then everybody else is going to start doing the same thing. So it may not be a lot of phosphorus reduction for a couple of different projects, but it all adds up to hopefully changing the environmental ethic of a community, and they start doing this on their own. And that's our approach. You got to make sure that once the clean water funding is limited, that we are going to be able to see this happen on its own because the community values that approach. And looking at what are most important in terms of the ability to actually keep prices down with phosphorus reduction up. There are categories that are better than others. And this is something that you've all seen. You've seen a lot of these slides before, actually. I took them from the Clean Water CWIP presentation that was given to you all earlier. But with streams, that restoration, it's going to be, and protection, and is going to be cheap. Buffers are going to be even cheaper. Shoreline restoration is a pretty good bang for your buck. But then when you get into stormwater, that's a lot more expensive. And so you've got to think about, what can we afford? And Dean has made some good points that this is actually getting more expensive, and what's reality here. Road BMPs, because they're fast and easy. It's a ditch, it's a culvert, it's a turnout. They're cheap, and that's sort of the philosophy behind it, that we just do a lot of them everywhere and make sure that people who own roads are like, yeah, that's what we need to do, and this is how we're going to do it. This is just an example of, it's out there, we have this. So we've got for stormwater master planning, we've got, and geomorphic assessments, we have different approaches, which I'll just go through quickly. For the stormwater master planning, we have actually mapping that provided some information beforehand about where the infrastructure is that exists. So like in Enosburg, there are pipes and catch basins, and there are opportunities where those catch basins exist to do some projects, and Jim Pease can tell you more about that. And this may be an area where we could focus more on. Most of the towns have it, and it gives you sort of helps you, it could help us understand or maybe fund some additional projects. Stormwater master plans, those are the projects all sort of packaged up. And you probably have heard that we've done a fair amount already in looking at what's out there. So this can be a little bit complicated to try to find projects from, and we may need to be more creative in how we find these stormwater projects then. In terms of future stormwater master plans to expect, there were some thoughts that maybe Troy, Montgomery, Lowell could be an area for them. Montgomery right now, actually, Franklin County NRCD is doing a flood resilience study, which is to some degree is going to address some of that need. So these are smaller areas, and they may not need a stormwater master plan. We may want to be a little bit more creative and just do a smaller version of it, an easier, less time consuming and less expensive process for finding those developed land projects. So for streams, then we have the stream geomorphic assessments that we've done over the last, somebody give me a number, like 10, 15 years. And so you'll see that we have some understanding of what the conditions are for the main stems throughout the watershed. You can see the tribs here that have some assessment to it. But at this point, we know that we have lists of projects, and we have some sense that berms are a great bang for the buck. You just take it out, you've got an enhanced floodplain. But it's a little bit difficult when you have landowners who have put the berm there for a reason, because they are cultivating something in that floodplain. Stacy and I will be meeting with Dean and Maddie soon, and these are the ideas that we have for an increase in or a variation of the assessments. And it includes, for example, with the Trout River, up in the headwaters, you're still having some adjustment of the tribs up there, and the stream crossings are helping to keep those areas from meeting equilibrium. So is there a possibility of, could we find some projects there, especially where a lot of the funding could come from other funding sources that don't need the phosphorus reduction, like U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service? So here are the ideas, and we can all be working on these. I can send this out to people if they want after we've had our initial discussion with Dean and Maddie. Lake watershed action plans, these are new. So they basically took the stormwater master planning process and the stream geomorphic assessment process and basically focused it on the watershed of a lake. Lake-wise is something you've probably all heard about, but that's where you just focused on the shoreline. And again, with this idea that if you can get a few people to change how they manage their lakeshore, everybody else will follow if you can get enough people to do that. So the existing assessments that we have right now, Lake Carmi has one, like an earlier one, a lake in crisis plan. Fairfield Pond just is finishing up. If someone from Friends of Northern Lake Champlain there, they can let us know when that's going to be done. So there'll be projects out of that. Lake-wise is something that's been supported around Lake Carmi and Fairfield Pond. There are some projects there and they have been implemented, but there's potential for more there since it's already started. So private road assessments, this is new. We have the road assessments that we created for the municipalities to make it easy for them to meet the MRGP, Municipal Road General Permit. They fast and easy. and let's do the worst, or the set road segments that are going to be most likely to dissolve into the, a nearby stream. So we're still working with it, though. We're not sure what's going to be the best process for it, finding those segments that we need to prioritize. So with the Lake Champlain Basin program, we supported one around Lake Carmi. I think Fairfield Pond has had some assessment as well, but we need to step back and start talking about it as a whole with our partners. So, and Dean has mentioned that they know, they have experience. They can provide us with information that will help us sort of make the next set of revisions to how we're going to prioritize those road segments for public funding. Forest road assessments. So right now there's someone's out there in the forests of Vermont, making sure that the assessment that we're identifying, we're developing is actually going to work. So we should be able to start supporting that soon. I know the J State Forest is up for a long-term management plan that wants to include and identify areas where forest road assessments can happen. So stay tuned. That may be available projects in the future. So just wanted to give you a little bit more about Lake and Watershed Action Plan. But this is one that was done for Lake Caspian Lake just recently, but you've got the projects, the description of what the BMPs are, so you can get a sense. Like, I know that if it's going to be a stream buffer, it's going to give me a fair amount of phosphorus reduction. But a lot of that has already been provided through this assessment process that we've helped to support. And so we know from all of these projects which ones are going to have the greater water quality benefit, which ones are going to have the better cost benefit. Are there other benefits that we need to basically acknowledge? And what does the landowners, what are they going to say when we say we've got a project on in your area? And then they get ranked. So it can be part of a discussion. They just had a discussion last week with Lake Association and identified the projects they at least wanted to support for the next phase of 30% development. These two, wetland restoration, ag, non-wrap farms, there's not as much of a step-by-step as there are with the other two. Wetland restoration, we know the priority wetlands based on some mapping that was done. There were some packages put together that identified the best areas for wetland. And the Franklin County NRCD did look at some of these, but that's definitely an area that we could work more with to identify potential projects. And then agricultural non-wrap farms. Yeah, I'm not sure. We need to talk more about that. Okay, so that's it, basically. Anybody has any questions, or if you just want to move on?
Well, Karen, there were a couple of things in the chat. Lauren just wanted to point out that that project in Montgomery, they haven't heard about the funding yet.
Okay.
And then it would be great if we could see these slides and specifically the slide about the subwatersheds. So I don't know if you can share this slide deck with us, but
sure. Yep.
It's good information to share with other partners as well.
Yeah. Let's see, I haven't even opened the chat. All right, so I guess that's it for questions.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say thanks for making sure that in the lake projects that landowner is part of the scoring, because that's been something we've banged our heads against a lot. So
yeah,
it's nice to see that there.
So Karen, one comment about your initial slide that shows the stream bank. It would be great if you had an up-to-date slide to put next to that one, because it would tell a pretty compelling story.
Yeah, I have one maybe a year after, but yeah, I would love it. So if anybody wants to send one to me, I will make sure.
Yeah, we can get you one. It held up to the July rains well. We were pleased to see that.
Oh, that's great. Great to hear. Okay. So I guess I will see. top share.
Great. Well, thanks, Karen. We appreciate you giving us that sort of high level overview, and you teased some more information coming, which would be great. Do you know who's doing the long-term management plan for, is that Forest Parks and Rec for the J State Forest?
Yeah, so I'm on the committee, subcommittee, and we're now trying to figure out what's going to be contracted out and what's going to be done in-house.
Great.
And I promoted you guys. I said, if you want public input, so
great. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that's happening. It's come up time and again about how can we address these road issues for a lot of things, for recreation, for safety, for backcountry rescues. So that'll be great. Jim, go ahead.
I was just curious, where is that stream bank restoration project on the river?
The first slide?
The first photo, yeah.
It's Millbrook in Westfield. It's on Jake's property. And yeah, as Karen said, to give you the bit of the background, the project identification came from the landowner. Jake said, I am losing gobs of land every year, and this is problematic. So we did, gosh, what year was that, Jake? Maybe it was very early in my time with MRBA. We did
3-4 years ago. Yeah, that's why it'd be great to show an up-to-date slide, because it's amazing how the willows have really grown into that bank. That was a multi-lift system. I don't know if I could explain it right, Lindsay. But a lot of labor in there from some of the kids at the Northwoods Stewardship Center, and the National Park Service Foundation funded that project, and it stabilized it. We haven't lost any more there, and we were losing like hundreds, well, maybe thousands of tons of soil every year. So it's a great project.
Yeah, and just to emphasize, because equilibrium is our goal, that if you stabilize with woody plants, then it slows it down to a more normal rate of erosion, because it's got some resistance. But it can, if the stream needs to go a little further one way or the other to meet that state of equilibrium, it still can, and it will over time, but just not all during the next storm.
Yeah, that also, the adjacent bank is very well connected to the floodplain. So that was it was a great location. I'll drop our website highlight on that just so folks can see. There is an estimation, I think it's on the website, of how much sediment was lost over the 20 or so years that Jake was watching his bank wash away. And in the final report, which I'm not sure is linked on our website, but I did make an estimation of the phosphorus load. Sorry, my computer, apparently my wireless keyboard battery died during this meeting. So. Right. Any other questions about the stuff that Karen brought up, or comments, or anything else? Okay. Well, thanks, Karen. That was great. It's good to see all these potential prioritization spots. Dean, did you want to return to contracting requirements?
Yeah, I just was going to say, mention a few things before we moved on to the next agenda item. I'm not going to bother with a slide, but remind people of things like there is something called the performance reporting requirement, and we ourselves at the NRPC are going through this with a project. There are templates that DEC has for final reports and final reporting for projects, and so when you get funding from the QUISP and are wrapping up your project, you have to remember that you're going to have to use the latest version of the reporting template for your project. So there are things like that going to be making sure that all of the project partners who are using the QuIS funds do those. You're already aware of needing to have your projects do the steps and the milestones and deliverables that this list of eligible projects includes, but this template is something that comes at the end of completing your project. There are also things like the acknowledgement if you're doing any publications. Got to remember that it's not always easy to remember it if you're doing a report. Things like press releases and that comes into play. And then just because it can be a bit of a hassle, listing the NRPC on insurance. These are things that are part of the QuIS process as I understand it. And so we're going to be going to you, and I think in at least some cases saying you have to put the NRPC on your insurance. And that's something that some of us are familiar with, but if you've never done such a thing, then we're going to have to talk. We're going to have to talk through it. But that's all I was going to say on the administrative stuff. That's more than enough to hit you with. And like I said, we're going to be setting up meetings with the individual, or perhaps another meeting as a group, but walking through these. And the part that I haven't touched on is that we're hoping to have a system where people can track the progress or report, how things are going online, and we can avoid having to bug you up to ask the question. You can tell us by filling out something that's online, and we can monitor the progress along with the billing. Jim's hand is up, but I don't know if that's still up from before.
Sorry, it was up from before, but I do want to add one thing, just, that was an issue when I was working, and it may or may not be an issue, is that you just have to be careful when you do the 3 RFPs. You can't list a proprietary technology. You have to be generic enough to say, you just can't use a patented name or a specific, technology when you're advertising. Dave probably knows this, but I know it did run into a mistake for us that was pretty expensive at one point. So you just have to be careful. And that was back at a time, I don't know who would review the RFPs. If you submitted, and I guess the QuISP would review the RFP if is that right, Dean? I don't know.
Yes, yeah, that's right. I would love to hear examples in the types of projects we will be seeing where there's a specific manufacturer that might be everybody's preference and that you can't mention. So if you can give an example.
Well, yeah, a good example would be we in Morristown, we used Vortechnics as the design name, as the name for the type of swirl separator. And it was after we had done the design for the Vortechnics, and we were told, I believe by VTrans, that you can't do that. And so we ended up, unfortunately, having to redesign the project to be more, less proprietary. And in the end, it worked out because we got a really cheap project, but somebody underbid just to get their swirl separator into the state. But you just can't do that. You can't state specifically a type of project. You have to be, especially when you get into design and engineering, you've got to be pretty generic about what you want, because you could end up designing something that you can't use, which is what happened to us. We had a design for Vortechnics, then we went out to bid, and this other company came in with a whole different design, and we had to go with the low bid with VTrans. So anyway, it's just something to watch out for.
Yeah, and indeed it is. And it's one of those things that's on my list that I had not thought to mention today, just because I wasn't sure how often it would be coming up But you're right, the swirl separator example is a good one. For many natural resource types projects, I'm not sure if that would come into play, but that's the kind of thing that the QUISP will need to be monitoring so that we can help the partners avoid the problem so that we're both not in trouble later.
Yeah, I don't know how specific it gets. I mean, maybe Dave knows, but you know, if you're purchasing, and I don't know how often this would happen, a specific truck, you can't say a Dodge Ram 2000 or whatever. You have to be fairly generic. You're right. I don't know that there are some technologies out there that are specific to phosphorus reduction that you would have to be generic about and I mean, there's also those, you know, good examples, the thing in Lake Carmel, the circulator. I mean, you could not specify a specific named company to be the as the manufacturer. It would have to be more generic, like I'm not sure what that thing, the aerator, just as an example.
Yeah, this may be something that deserves another conversation with a smaller group with natural resource weighted projects. You know, I'm assuming that it's also incorrect to name a specific vendor, but you know, for the purposes of a meeting like this, I know I've encountered situations where people will talk about getting something from, what is it, Vermont Wetlands Supply. You know, we'll have to avoid those situations. It also makes me wonder about, you know, certain as more and more seed types get patented or some kind of intellectual property, you know, we have to avoid those things as well.
Right.
But I don't think that it's going to be something that will come up a lot. This is why I didn't think to mention it, but I see Dave raised his hand and started.
Yeah, I would just say that Jim's absolutely right. You have to kind of design things generically, and that's why the whole design, build, construction method works, is that you put your design out there, and then the contractors come back at you and say, well, I propose to use such and such, and then the engineers review it and decide if that's going to work or not. You know, so you do have this back and forth while the project is being built a little bit. That was all I was going to add.
So if we're ready to move on, Lindsay, we're at a point where we can talk about updates and conclusion. I was going to touch base on a couple of things. One is that I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we are through our first year as a QUISP and as a BWIC, and that meant that there was reporting that the QUISP had to do. We submitted those back in August, and we had the first annual check-in meeting with our program manager just yesterday. If people are interested in seeing that, I'm happy to share that information. I'm not sure that it would be of interest, but we have to report some things. One example I will share is a table, and it somewhat connects with this idea of the project status grid. And so in the materials for this meeting, I talked about, or I mentioned, the project status grid. And this is something that Tom Brizzleton, who is on the board of Friends and is involved with the BWIC in Basin 5, but I don't think Tom is here today. I think it's something he's promoted in Basin 5 before. I'm just going to show people what one of the pieces of the information that we have to provide to DEC every year is going to be. And I think that it's going to be the starting point for this project status grid. In other words, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think that the wheel's already partly built, and it's already something that we're going to be submitting or are submitting to DEC. So every year, we as a QUISP will be updating this spreadsheet, which hopefully everybody can see. and for every project, and we remember that projects include the phases of a project, so it's going to have a separate ID. So it's got an ID, it's got a type, we know who the manager of that project is, what the name is, what the description, the category, and this ties into some of what Karen was saying. You know, each project has a category, and this is something that's used in that spreadsheet that I'm going to be sending to Dave. But information about its location, which watershed subbasin it's in, and here, you know, also relevant information about what has been spent on the project. And then as it moves through, there's also going to be information about how much phosphorus was removed, and so on. So I'm sharing this because I think that it's, and I should just stop for a second and say it counts for many different types of projects and will store information about those projects. But these things are this is blacked out because we don't have any stormwater projects included. But if we had a stormwater project, there would be certain rows that would need to be filled out. The point of all of this is just that there are some folks who think it would be helpful if there's this one master spreadsheet where we can see where all the projects are. And to some extent, that's already starting to happen, at least with the projects that are funded, and it's going to grow over time. What I think some people are hoping is that by laying all of these things out, we might get to a point where we can expand the size of the pipeline or see opportunities that we aren't seeing already. In a different part of state government and transportation, there's different terminology used, but I think it's comparable to what we're doing here. The QUISP and the BWIC are putting together an improvement program, and we get projects funded and they go forward and they get built. And so it's part of an improvement program. We 1 year of that program is the budget year. So we're spending money in a given year. And this is a spreadsheet like this is gonna help us track. In the transportation world, they've talked about the front of the book and the back of the book. And what I think is gonna require a lot of people's attention is the projects that are really early stage, that they are maybe so vague that we're not sure if they're going to really be projects, but they might end up in this list at some point. And Karen's presentation got at some of this by showing us there are all these different types of assessment that come up with project ideas that, you know, when you have 20 different problems around Caspian Lake, you got to choose some of them to focus on to actually do some work. And so whether or not, you know, it's going to be helpful to compile all of the Lake Watershed Action Plans so that everybody can see what the long list is, or if it's going to make sense to take the top 5 or compiling, but maybe that's the opportunity. And anyway, I'm just mentioning that at the core of the work that the QUISP is doing, we must report annually what we're doing that gets QUISP funding. And that's going to also eventually include what we have to spend money doing operations and maintenance on. But maybe there's a place for a part of a spreadsheet like this to talk about the really vague project ideas. And then we can prioritize those and sort those so that we can get a better handle on what the promising areas are and direct funding to those. And maybe it would be the sort of thing where the BWIC says, you know, we think there's a lot of promise in a particular sub-watershed in the Missisquoi Basin. Or maybe you say you think there's a lot of promise in working with the non-RAP farms. I don't know what it is, but then the BWIC might say, let's just do a call for projects that is looking for people that want to study and do assessments and get money out the door to that very early stage of things that could start to enter the pipeline. Anyway, that's all I was going to say about that. And if there were questions, you know, ask, and if not, then I'll just wrap. wrap up. I know that Tom Brizzleton had mentioned this. Ken, do you have any perspective to share on Tom's interest? I know you can't speak for him, but I don't know if you've also talked with him enough about this to be aware.
I really don't have anything to add that would help the group's understanding, except I think it is a method of just keeping up to date on how the projects are rolling along, just to be sure that we are making some progress and to have an idea about areas that maybe need more attention.
Yeah, at one point there was a thought that I had about doing surveys of different partner organizations or just compiling the information that partner organizations might have about the things that are, you know, possibilities for them. I can appreciate that might mean making them do work that they would rather not do. But my hope is that even if it isn't something that becomes part of a QUISP or BWIC spreadsheet, that we can create conditions where the partner organizations have a defined list of the 10 projects that they think they might be able to work on in the next few years, because there's the hope of getting QUISP and BWIC funding to do them. Last thing I was going to say was simply that the DEC guidance chapters, we've talked about the conflict of interest chapter. The comments for that chapter are due on Friday at 9 p.m. There's a new chapter that is out and getting informal comment that's known as Chapter 9. And it's the chapter that addresses what's called adequate progress. So we have talked since the beginning of this how the QUISP and the WIC exist to try to get projects done that will meet phosphorus targets. Chapter 9 is the chapter that is meant to help us understand, well, what do we do when we don't meet the targets, and how good is good enough, and what is adequate progress? And it's a fairly detailed chapter, and if it's something that is of interest to you, let me know and I can get you a copy. There's an informal comment deadline on that in another couple of weeks. But anyway, let me know if it's something that is of interest.
Great. Thank you, Dean. I don't know if anyone else has any final topics they wanted to bring up. Okay. Hearing none, I will seek a motion to adjourn today's WIC meeting.
Second the motion, or I make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Okay, so Alaire made a motion. Sarah seconded. All in favor? Got Sarah, Barry, Alaire, myself, Kent, and Lauren. Any opposed? Okay. While that draws our September, how the heck is it September, BWIC meeting to a close at 12:33. Thanks very much to everyone for joining. Oh, Julie, or Lauren. Oh.
I was raising my hand to make sure you saw Julie. I don't know. Okay.
Maybe she was waving goodbye. Nope, there. Julie, you're still there? Did you want to say something?
No, it's okay.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining today, and look forward to seeing some of the materials and see you all in November.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.